The Origins of NYPD Blue. Even though NYPD Blue debuted as a cultural landmark and maintained a fan base that kept it alive for 12 years, the series experienced an extended period of social amnesia after its cancellation. While Law & Order and its various permutations lives forever in the landscape of cable TV, NYPD Blue spent years without a stable home for its reruns, likely a victim of the initial gimmick used to sell the series. Everyone knows what NYPD Blue is famous for, right? It's the network TV series that said "asshole" for the first time on television and offered viewers regular glimpses of its stars in various states of undress. Why was this hook used in the first place? What is the origin of NYPD Blue? Development of the show began in 1991, when David Milch proposed a cop show to Stephen Bochco that Bochco dismissed as not very good. Milch wanted to do a series about a cop working undercover in the mob, with the device of tape recordings being used to tell much of the story. Bochco wanted a show that could revive the hour drama for network television. His idea was to develop a cop show that pushed the boundaries of language, sexuality, and violence. Apparently, his reasoning was that this would be less gratuitous in the context of a realistic police drama, all the while giving network TV something that it had never seen before and building publicity for the series before its debut. ABC agreed to develop the series, and Bochco and Milch began work on the pilot. Bochco then fought with the network for a year to obtain a specific list of things he could and couldn't do on the show, delaying NYPD Blue's series debut from 1992 to 1993. The context of the early 90s is important to remember. This is not the Rudy Giuliani, Disney-fied Times Square, kids skipping school for a glimpse of pop stars entering the MTV studios, New York, of the late 90s. This is still, essentially, the crime-ridden, urban decay, Bernie gets shooting muggers on the subway, New York, of the 1980s. NYPD Blue is the last representation of that era of New York, and due to the long run of its series, viewers can watch the show itself evolve along with the city. The language/nudity gimmick certainly succeeded in giving Blue advanced publicity. The debut of the series was preceded by months of reports about affiliates refusing to air the show, religious groups arranging protests, and behind-the-scenes conflict between the producers and ABC regarding last-minute edits. Milch maintains in his True Blue book that due to his temperament, he stayed away from these discussions and allowed Bochco to take the heat. Ultimately, it seems the language/nudity gimmick hurt the second life of the series. For starters, it makes the name of the show a pun, as in NYPD Blue works blue. Every hackneyed newscast in 1993 asked the question, is NYPD Blue too blue for television? Secondly, it's harmed NYPD Blue's run in syndication. The series debuted in late-night syndication in 1997 because affiliates didn't want to air the series during the day, placing it up against comedic talk shows and infomercials, and TNT's later attempt to air a censored version of the series in the mornings was a bust. Also, just the freedom to feature partial nudity didn't give producers the story justification to actually do it. Many of the nude scenes on the show are literally tacked on to the end of an episode. Watch the first season's finale, Rockin' Robin, a wonderfully written episode that serves as the redemption of Detective Sipowicz, a character we met at the start of the season as a drunken shell of a man. Then watch that tacky sex scene in the final 90 seconds that mars everything that preceded it. That title is also terrible. Blue debuted back when most viewers never saw the titles of episodes. While the nude scenes can occasionally elicit an eye roll, the show itself is mature enough to excuse this excess. It's actually quite remarkable how consistent the series remained over the course of a dozen years, especially given the extremely high standards set by the first season. What set Blue apart, aside from the naughty talk and bare heinies? The look. Blue is often referred to as shaky cam or documentary style, which is accurate. But there is a specific use of the camera developed in the pilot that remains unique. Director Gregory Hoblet wanted the camera to act as the viewer, in the sense that you're in the room with the characters. Early on, you'll notice that he rarely cuts from one actor to another in a scene. Instead, the camera swings over to face the actor, just as you would turn your head to look at someone speaking. The show doesn't stick to this aesthetic religiously, but it maintains a unique feel throughout most of the run. The authenticity. Talking about NYPD Blue would be impossible without mentioning Bill Clark, the man who pretty much is the show. Clark was working as an NYPD homicide detective in 1992 when he received a call asking him to read the pilot script and give his thoughts on it. Milch asked a friend, a New York Times columnist, if he knew a cop who could give notes on the script. The columnist responded that Clark was the best detective he knew. Soon, Clark was a consultant on the show. By the end of the first season, he had his first writing credit. By the second season, he retired from the NYPD and moved to California to become an associate producer on the series. By the third season, he was co-writing most of the episodes. By the final season, he was an executive producer, co-writing every episode of the show. The cop mentality that permeates the series is Bill Clark. When detectives examine a crime scene, speculate on a killer's motive, or interview a suspect, that's Bill Clark. Not only did Clark influence the series' view of police work, but Clark's friendship with David Milch is said to have had a noticeable impact on Milch's writing. Clark has a peculiar way of speaking, a kind of cumbersome, formal, yet slightly whimsical way of structuring sentences. Clark co-wrote the True Blue book, inserting his own cop stories in the book whenever Milch references one that inspired a plot on the show. Clark's speech pattern likely influenced what came to be known as cop talk, which later evolved into the rather notorious Milch speak. For better or worse, this style of writing goes on to dominate the show up until Milch's departure. Clark's background was also adopted for parts of the backstories of not only Dennis Franz's character, but Jimmy Smits as well. As an homage to Clark, his name was usually featured on the assignment board during the first season, even though the viewer never saw a detective named Clark. Bill Clark himself did cameo several times in the early years, but he was never identified by name, and often just appeared to be any random cop working for any detail that the 15th Detective Squad encountered. In the final seasons of the show, Sipowicz is paired with a young John Clark, whose father is a detective, one that's worked with Sipowicz in the past. In your NYPD Blue fan fiction, you might declare that mysterious Clark on the board as John Clark Sr. Another side note, even though Clark was a homicide detective, the actual classification of a homicide detective is rarely, if ever, mentioned on the show. The detectives on the series work murders, certainly, but they'll take robbery, assault, and domestic violence cases if they happen to be up whenever a civilian needs a detective. Reportedly, homicide detectives often travel to other precincts and help detectives in that house clear murders, a fact the show dances around. Apparently, Bill Clark and David Milch remain close. Clark tends to get a credit on Milch's shows, either on the opening as a producer or in the closing credits, in what we assume are joke credits. Clark's credited as a welfare worker on Deadwood. People who know Milch say that his dream TV project is to tell the story of Clark's early days on the NYPD in the 1970s. The closest he's come is Last of the Ninth, an HBO pilot the network didn't pick up. Milch's short-lived HBO series John from Cincinnati featured Ed O'Neill playing a neurotic, retired NYPD detective with a fascination with birds. That's Bill Clark. Perhaps caricatured a bit, or a lot, for dramatic purposes. It's not a procedural. Even though NYPD Blue is methodical about showing you how cases are worked, and the various legal issues that surround law enforcement, the series isn't strictly a procedural. It's not strictly a drama, either. Milch doesn't feel as if one should contradict the other. It's a show about friendship and loyalty, with some soap opera elements thrown in, and not just the case of the week. This is likely one reason why the show reached such a mainstream audience. You care about the characters, but you're also invested in their work. Most network procedurals are now based on some kind of gimmick, but Blue holds up even after several re-airings because it's not dogged about being just one thing. It also enables the show to increase its batting average. If you're not invested in the personal life segments this week, the case might draw you in. Or vice versa. It's a smart approach to series writing, and it's a shame that network TV dramas don't seem to follow this ideal any longer.